It is now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. To my right, Mr. Mark Copeland. Mark is a distinguished historian and a gifted presenter on many topics, but is a renowned expert on aviation history, particularly during World War II. He has served on the board of directors and is a national president of the 8th Air Force Historical Society and is currently on the board of directors and executive committee for the 100th Bomb Group Foundation. He is a widely published author, international speaker, and regarded as one of the world's leading authorities on the United States 8th Air Force in World War II. And I'm lucky to call him my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Copeland.
Thank you very much, Colonel, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good afternoon. It's very humbling to be in this place today, and on behalf of our president, Mr. Dan Rosenthal, our board of directors, and the members of the 100th Bomb Group Foundation, I want to thank Colonel Mark and his staff for the warm welcome and the graciousness that he showed one and all of us. It's incredible to be here, and especially to be in the presence of you guys, the cadets. It's very, very, very humbling to stand in what I would call America's finest. And thank you for being here today. Again, not to repeat Colonel, but I believe in starting things in the right way right off the bat. This hall has hosted presidents, heads of state, great world leaders. It's hosted wonderful artists, musicians, comedians, entertainers. But this hall has a special day today because this hall is filled with genuine American heroes. And once again, another round of applause for our 100th Bomb Group vets. Our program today is a chronological history of one of the most critical and poignant times in American military history, Black Week, a period from October 8th through the 14th of 1943, excuse me. Before we go any further, I just have a question for the cadets. With the show of hands, just raise your hand up. How many of you are between the ages of 18 and 23? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, I guess my conclusion was right. Thank you for that. We'll come back to that. To start off the program here, an 8th Air Force bomber crew consisted of 10 men on a team, and I definitely highlight the word team. It consisted of a pilot, a co-pilot, a bombardier, a navigator, a flight engineer, top turret gunner, a radio operator gunner, a ball turret gunner, a left and right waist gunner, and a tail gunner. I mentioned the word team. An 8th Air Force bomber crew was more of a brotherhood. It just had to be that way. You had a commitment to one another to do your job in the fiercest times of combat, because your life and the lives of your crewmen depended on it. It was just understood. They flew 4-engine bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator. A normal bombing altitude was typically 23 to 30,000 feet. The temperatures at that time, especially in the winter, obviously, could get down to minus 50, 60 below zero. They wore heavy, as you can see here, heavy laden leather flying suits. They had electrical suits under that would plug in that sometimes would work. They had to wear, obviously oxygen masks, and in this one kind of looks like a cross between a Major League Baseball catcher and Darth Vader. That's what they wore. And the suit on the front of it was actually a thing called a flak suit that protected you from exploding German anti-aircraft fire and piercing the side of the skin that was hardly thicker than Reynolds wrap. The 8th Air Force crewmen Also had things in terms of the aircraft being non-pressurized. It was cold up there. They opened up, they had side waist windows, as you can see here, and they were totally exposed to the elements. The aircraft had no sophisticated radar. They had no GPS, no satellite imagery. They had no smartphones. And they had no air traffic control. You could easily take off on a bright, sunny English morning, go on a mission over Germany, and then come back to 0 visibility in the afternoon and try and land your bomber at a base, sometimes with an engine out, sometimes with major hydraulic problems. Your brakes are shot, or even worse, you had a wounded crew member clinging on to life. You had to depend on your maintenance crew. That was a key element, the unsung heroes of the mighty Eighth. You put your trust in them, and they kept the bombers in the sky. If it wasn't for our ground crewmen, if it wasn't for our ground, indeed, thank you. If it wasn't for our ground crews, the 8th Air Force would never have the success it had. The first mission the 8th Air Force ever flew was on August 17th, 1942. And the target was Rouen, France. They bombed some marshalling yards and some railroad installations, and they had 12 B-17s. That was it. But let's also remember this. This is the first time in American history that we have fought a war on a different part of the world at a different continent with American equipment, American aircraft, American personnel, and this had never been done before. So each day was new. This was the man that was in charge. This is General Ira C. Aker, a brilliant tactician, a fine airman in his day, a very, very well-known aviator in the 20s and 30s, and it was his responsibility to take 8th Air Force Command and get it started. But in the fall of 1943, which is the period that we're talking about, he had a lot of pressure from the Pentagon. They wanted to go farther into Germany, bomb more strategic targets in the German mainland. And of course, Aker knew that his bombers couldn't make it, which will be illustrated in other speakers here shortly. The bombers couldn't make it with proper fighter escort. The fighters just didn't have the range, and they had to turn around and go back to England, and the bombers were left on their own. So in 1943, in October of 1943, the 8th Air Force started to penetrate farther into Germany. There's a nice formation and a cloud bank of B-17s. So this is Black Week, October 8th. The target was Bremen, Germany. You saw the B-17s just a second ago. 30 of those went down with 10 guys on each airplane. On October 9th, 1943, the targets of Onklin, Marienburg, and Danzig, Germany, 18 bombers were lost. And October 10th, 1943, the target was Munster, Germany, and 30 bombers were lost. And then capping that, the worst one, 2nd Schweinfurt, October 14th, 1943, 60 heavy bombers were lost. To complete a tour and to have the right to go home, an 8th Air Force bomber crewman had to complete 25 missions to make a combat tour. In October of 1943, the average life expectancy for an 8th Air Force bomber crew was 7 missions. As Colonel Mark illustrated, especially at that time in October of 1943, think about waking up in the morning and having the chances of 1 in 3 chances of not coming back and sleeping in that bunk that night. Quite overwhelming odds. In a matter of 6 days and 4 missions, the 8th Air Force would sustain 138 heavy bombers as lost and 31 fighters. Over 1,400 airmen were killed, 1,400 airmen were lost in combat, either killed in action, missing in action, or they were prisoners of war. The point that we want to make and to revisit today is what these men did. And the reason I asked all of you to raise your hand, the gentlemen that we just recognized, they were just as old as you are. They were just as old as you. In the time of October 1943, bravery and valor was not a special circumstance. It was commonplace. The stories that you're about to hear illustrate the fact that over 26,000 8th Air Force airmen were killed in action. Over 28,000 were shot down and captured and spent the war as a POW. The 8th Air Force was the largest air armada ever assembled, one of the greatest fighting forces in world history. The mission was to rid the world of the worst tyranny that humankind has ever seen. Just remember, they were just your age. The story is about courage, it's about honor, and it's about sacrifice. And today, I'm very happy to say that we have three very astute presenters, and ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Black Week.